There comes a point after the chaos, after the tears, after the silence when they realize they've lost you. Not because you screamed, not because you fought, but because you did something far more terrifying. You healed. You stopped needing them. And that moment, that quiet, steady moment when your peace no longer depends on their approval, that's when everything shifts. Because narcissists don't fear your anger, they fear your indifference. And when they see you've won the one battle they never prepared for yourself, they begin to unravel. Not loudly, but deeply, irreversibly. Imagine a moment quiet, slow, and cold when the narcissist finally begins to see it. Not with words, not with confession, but in the silence you left behind. You walked away, not out of anger, not even pain, but out of clarity. And it is in that stillness that something shifts. Because you see, a narcissist doesn't wake up to empathy, they wake up to loss. But the truth is, what you did wasn't just walk away. You won. And winning in this context doesn't mean revenge. It means recovery. It means ownership. It means you stop making yourself small to keep the peace. And now the narcissist faces something they can't control: your peace, your growth, your life. So what really happens when they realize you've won? That's what we're going to explore piece by piece. And not for their sake, but for yours, because you deserve to understand your freedom. There's a strange kind of panic that sets in when the narcissist sees you no longer react. It's not loud. It's not theatrical. It's subtle, but it runs deep. Because up until now, your emotions were the lever they pulled, the rope they yanked to feel powerful. But the day you stop flinching, stop explaining, stop needing validation from someone who never planned to give it, that's the day the power dynamic breaks. They begin to sense it, that your silence is not a game. It's a sign. And beneath all their bravado, they feel something unfamiliar: irrelevance. That's not just punishment, it's accountability. And for the first time, maybe ever, they're forced to meet the one opponent they never expected: your healed self. When you win against a narcissist, it's not because you fought harder. It's because you stopped fighting at all. That's the paradox. They thrive in conflict, but collapse in clarity. You stepping back, building your life, creating boundaries, it speaks louder than any confrontation. And this shift, this personal evolution, triggers them. Not because you hurt them, but because you stop needing them. Your independence exposes their dependency. Your peace reminds them of their chaos. But here's what matters more: your growth isn't about proving them wrong. It's about becoming someone you're finally proud to be. And that more than anything breaks the cycle. People often ask, do narcissists feel regret when you move on? Maybe. But it's not the kind of regret that leads to change. It's a regret rooted in lost control, lost supply, lost image. It's ego bruised, not heartbroken. But that doesn't matter. What matters is what you build in their absence. A self-image that no longer needs rescuing. A voice that speaks without apology. A life that blooms without validation. You see, the win isn't just survival. It's transformation. You didn't escape the narcissist. You outgrew them. And growth, real growth, is louder than revenge. There's this misconception that healing from narcissistic abuse means forgiveness or peace or some grand moment of closure. But real healing is much quieter. It's showing up for yourself on the days you want to hide. It's choosing not to answer the text. Not because you're playing games, but because you've stopped playing altogether. The narcissist doesn't expect that kind of maturity. They expect chaos. And when you choose stillness, when you choose purpose, they have no script for that. They don't know how to control someone who no longer doubts themselves. That's how they know you've won. Not when they lose control over you, but when you gain control over yourself. Winning isn't just about moving on. It's about making meaning out of what happened, and that takes strength. The narcissist won't tell your story honestly. They'll twist it, minimize it. But your job isn't to convince the world. Your job is to know deeply that your truth matters, that your experience was real. And in speaking that truth to yourself, to others, you break the silence that kept you stuck. It's not about bitterness. It's about dignity. You reclaim your life not by looking back in anger, but by walking forward with integrity. That's the quiet revolution the narcissist never sees coming. Eventually, something powerful happens. The narcissist may circle back. They might test the waters, send a message, make a vague apology, but you'll notice it feels different now. There's no pull, no ache, just awareness. That's the ultimate win, not just surviving the abuse, but outgrowing the need for their approval. You begin to see them clearly, not as monsters, not as victims, but as broken people who tried to control you because they couldn't control themselves. And in that moment, you realize you don't need closure from them. You gave it to yourself. That's the truth. That's the win. There comes a moment, a crucial, irreversible moment when the game changes. And it doesn't happen with fireworks. It doesn't announce itself. No applause, no music. It happens in silence. When you, for the first time in maybe years, stop reacting, see, that's the foundation of the narcissist strategy, reaction. If they can get a rise out of you, if they can poke and prod and push until you scream or collapse or explain yourself again and again, then they still own a piece of you. Even if you hate them, even if you're trying to break away, as long as your emotional energy is directed toward them, they win. So what happens when you stop? That's when the real shift begins. When you don't text back. When you don't take the bait. When you stop defending yourself to someone who never listened to understand, only to manipulate. That's when they panic. But not the kind of panic you might expect. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Not always right away. It's more like erosion. Their sense of power begins to dissolve. Because let's be honest, narcissists don't thrive on love. They thrive on dominance. Love is unpredictable. Love requires reciprocity. And they don't do well with that. What they want is control. And you, when you were in the middle of it all, you gave them just that, even if you didn't know it. Every argument you engaged in, every justification you gave, every emotional breakdown, every time you begged, apologized, explained, stayed. And it's not your fault. That's survival. That's the trauma response. That's what happens when someone chips away at your self-worth, bit by bit, until you're stuck in this psychological fog where truth feels like a luxury. You were trying to keep the peace. You were trying to fix what you didn't break. But you know what changed everything? That quiet decision, maybe made late at night, maybe after one too many nights of crying alone, to stop. To stop reacting. To stop explaining. To stop fixing. And that's where they begin to unravel. Not because they miss you, not really, but because they miss the control. They miss the feeling of importance. The feeling of superiority that came from watching you scramble, from watching you explain yourself again and again. See, the narcissist builds their identity on how much attention they can command. That's how they measure value. And when you walk away mentally, emotionally, spiritually, they start to lose that value. Now you might think they'll just move on, right? That they'll simply replace you, that they'll find someone else to manipulate. And maybe they will. But here's the truth, even if they find another target, they never forget the one who stopped playing. The one who broke the pattern. You haunt them not because you said something clever or because you hurt them, but because your silence said what your words never could. You no longer matter in the same way. Now, that might sound cruel, but it isn't. That's accountability. And narcissists don't like accountability. They want attention. They want devotion. They want you to need them even as they destroy you. And when you stop needing them, they have to look at themselves. That's terrifying because they've spent their entire lives avoiding that confrontation. But don't misunderstand, this isn't about you getting revenge. It's not about playing mind games. It's not about making them suffer. It's about reclaiming your mind, your energy, your dignity, because your reaction, your emotions, your thoughts, they belong to you. And when someone has trained you to give all of that away so that they can feel powerful, then healing begins with taking it back. Now, what does that actually look like in real life? It's in the day you receive that message and choose not to respond. Not because you're being cold, but because you've realized they don't deserve your explanation anymore. It's in the moment you start investing in your own growth. You read the books. You go to therapy. You meditate. You build a life that isn't built around anticipating someone else's mood swings. It's in the morning you wake up and realize you didn't check your phone hoping they contacted you. That you've stopped measuring your worth by whether or not they acknowledge your existence. That's power. That's real power. Not domination over someone else, but mastery over yourself. And when the narcissist sees that, they don't know what to do with it. Because they never had a plan for your freedom. They only had a strategy for your dependence. Now, you might ask, do they ever really realize what they lost? Yes. But not in the way you hope. They don't wake up and feel love the way you felt it. They don't cry in a dark room with a revelation of how badly they hurt you. No. They feel something else. Emptiness. Restlessness. A hole that can't be filled because they need constant affirmation to feel real. And when the person they once had total control over, the one who cried for them, begged for them, explained themselves endlessly, no longer sees them as important, that hole grows. And here's what's fascinating. Your peace becomes their discomfort. Your growth, your joy, your laughter that becomes a mirror. And they hate mirrors. Because mirrors tell the truth. They expose what's behind the mask. And narcissists live in masks. Their whole life is performance. Charm, manipulation, gaslighting, all of it is to cover up the shame they refuse to face. But when you walk away without chaos, without drama, without one last battle, you expose that truth. Not with your words, but with your absence. With your healing, with your boundaries. And let me tell you, boundaries are revolutionary when you've been in the cycle of narcissistic abuse. Because you've been trained to believe that love means sacrifice. That if you just give a little more, explain a little better, stay a little longer, they'll change. But they don't. Because change doesn't happen in someone who refuses to take responsibility. And when you finally understand that deep in your bones, you stop waiting. You stop hoping for closure that's never coming. You stop twisting yourself into knots to win approval from someone who weaponized your empathy. And that's when they lose. Not when you leave, but when you stop needing anything from them. That's the realization that breaks them. Now, does that mean they'll disappear forever? Not always. Some try to come back. They test the waters. Send a hey message. Pretend like nothing happened. Maybe even offer a half apology that doesn't include any ownership. But you're different now. You see through it. You see the pattern. And that clarity is your defense. You don't need to argue anymore. You don't need to prove your worth. You just live your life fully, authentically, freely. And that is the most powerful kind of revenge. Not revenge rooted in pain, but in transformation. Because the truth is, you never really wanted revenge. You wanted understanding. You wanted peace. You wanted to be seen. And when you stopped expecting that from them and started giving it to yourself, you won. That's the reality they can't stand. That you became whole without them. That the person they thought would never escape their grip is now thriving quietly, steadily, beautifully. And you did it not by becoming cold, not by hardening your heart, but by healing it. By realizing that love isn't supposed to hurt, that being needed is not the same as being loved, that someone who truly cares for you will not use your kindness as a weapon against you. So what happens when the narcissist realizes you've won? They feel the weight of their own emptiness. They see the reflection of what they could never be: honest, accountable, capable of love that nurtures instead of destroys. But more importantly, what happens is that you come alive. You start to dream again. You start to trust yourself. You learn to recognize red flags not as puzzles to solve, but as signs to walk away. You rebuild your relationships, your self-worth, your voice. And one day you'll look back not with bitterness, but with wisdom. Because surviving a narcissist isn't just a chapter in your story. It's the beginning of a deeper awakening. An awakening into strength, into self-respect, into freedom. And when they finally see you standing there untouched by their chaos, unbothered by their silence, unshaken by their absence, what happens is this: they realize you've become someone they can no longer reach. And that, my friend, is the end of the game. You've already won. It's strange, isn't it? And winning some kind of dramatic showdown. They come in quiet decisions. Decisions you make in your mind first. To let go. To change direction. To stop participating in a pattern that you know is killing your sense of self. When you're entangled with a narcissist, that pattern is everything. And the moment you stop feeding it, the moment you say no more, even if it's just to yourself, that's the moment you win. Not with weapons, not with revenge, but with clarity. That's a terrifying moment for them. Not for you. For you, it feels like peace wrapped in pain. For them, it feels like collapse. Because you see, the narcissist is addicted to chaos, but not any chaos. Your chaos, your reaction, your energy. They build their emotional framework around how you respond to them. You could yell, you could cry, you could explain for hours. It doesn't matter. All that matters to them is that you're still in the game, still fighting, still needing something from them, still proving. That gives them a sense of power. A false one, but it works for them. Now imagine you stop. You don't answer the phone. You don't argue back. You don't cry when they give you the silent treatment. You just breathe and make your bed and take a walk and read a book. You start healing quietly. That stillness, oh, they feel it. Even if they never say it, even if they pretend like they've moved on, they feel it. Because your stillness means you've stepped outside the role they assigned to you. You've rejected the script. You have to understand something crucial here. Narcissists thrive in conflict because conflict is predictable. It's structured. It's controlled chaos. And they've spent years perfecting how to navigate that chaos to get what they want: attention, dominance, obedience, emotional supply. But they collapse in clarity. In quiet, thoughtful, intentional clarity. Why? Because they have no map for that. You stepping back, you refusing to engage, that's not in their playbook. That's not something they know how to handle. And they panic. Maybe not in front of you, maybe not openly, but it starts as restlessness. They start testing you, sending little feelers. A message here, a question there, not to reconnect authentically, but to see if they still have access. Because to them, it's all about access. Do they still own a part of your mind? Can they still invade your thoughts? If they can, they feel safe. If they can't, they feel irrelevant. And here's the paradox. You didn't win by overpowering them. You won by stepping aside. That's what they don't understand. In their mind, every relationship is a power struggle. Hierarchy. Who's winning? Who's losing? Who has control? But you weren't playing to win. You were playing to be loved, to be safe, to be understood. And when you realized that was never going to happen, that no amount of sacrifice would earn you their care, you stopped playing. You left the arena. Now, they don't know what to do with that. It's like removing oxygen from a flame. It dies slowly, then suddenly, they might scramble. They might lash out. They might act like nothing has changed. But it has. You changed. And that's irreversible. And here's what's even more fascinating. Your growth becomes a trigger. Not because you're trying to trigger them, but because your progress reflects their stagnation. Your healing highlights their dysfunction. You're investing in therapy. They're still blaming everyone else. You're reading books, making friends, building new routines. They're trying to manipulate the next person into playing the same game. You've grown. They've repeated. And it's important to understand this. Narcissists don't hate you when you leave. They hate what your leaving represents. It represents that their illusion didn't work, that someone figured them out, that someone broke the cycle, that someone said enough and didn't come crawling back. And that scares them. Because if one person can escape, maybe others can too. Their whole system, this false sense of control, starts to feel fragile, cracked, unstable. Now let's talk about you for a second. Because this speech isn't really about them. It's about you. You didn't just survive them. You outgrew them. And that's a much more powerful thing. Survival is about defense. Outgrowth is about transformation. You took the pain, the manipulation, the gaslighting, and you turned it into wisdom, into strength, into something sacred. You learned to listen to your gut again, to trust your instincts. You learned that silence can be powerful, that not responding is a response, that some battles are won not by confrontation, but by elevation, by rising above them entirely. You also learned that love is not something you have to earn by abandoning yourself. And that lesson changes everything. Because when you know what real love looks like, respect, safety, kindness, you can spot the counterfeit from miles away. You can feel it in your bones, and you don't chase it anymore. You become selective, not bitter, just wise. You guard your peace like it's gold. You build boundaries not to keep people out, but to protect what you've worked so hard to reclaim: your dignity, your voice, your identity. And maybe for the first time in years, you start to feel proud of yourself. Not because someone finally validated you, but because you validated yourself. You became your own witness, your own advocate, your own protector. That's the win. And it's not loud. It doesn't come with fanfare. It comes when you're sitting alone one evening, drinking tea, reading a book, and you realize, I don't miss the drama. I don't miss the chaos. I don't miss trying to prove myself. I don't miss them. That's when you know you've made it out. And that's why your healing is the deepest loss they'll experience. Because they didn't just lose a partner, they lost a mirror, a witness, a stage. You see, when you were under their control, you weren't allowed to be fully human. Your emotions were a threat. Your opinions were challenges. Your independence was a betrayal. They needed you small so they could feel big. And for a while, you played that role. Not because you were weak, but because you were loyal. You loved. You believed. You hoped. But eventually, after enough nights of confusion, enough conversations that went in circles, enough emotional exhaustion, you woke up. And maybe it didn't happen all at once. Maybe it took weeks, months, years. But you started to see the pattern. You started to question the rules. And then you did the unthinkable. You chose yourself. You built a boundary. You walked away. You stopped explaining. You stopped participating in their reality. And that, more than anything else, is what narcissists cannot tolerate. Because you became uncontrollable. And in their world, that's unforgivable. Now let's talk about that for a moment, the process of reclaiming your sense of self. Because it's not easy. It's not like flipping a switch. It's more like climbing out of a pit you didn't even know you were in. One handhold at a time. One decision at a time. At first, it feels like betrayal to them, to the relationship, even to yourself. You've been trained to see their needs as more urgent than your own. You've been trained to think, if I just explain it better, if I just stay calmer, if I just love them harder, maybe they'll see me. Maybe they'll change. But they don't. because they don't see you. They see a role, a tool, a function. So the real moment of transformation is when you stop begging to be seen. When you turn inward and say, I see myself. That's the beginning of healing. That's the start of a new story. And the narcissist, that's when their illusion starts to crack, because your independence exposes their dependence. Your growth reveals their stagnation, and your self-love triggers their self-loathing. Now you might ask, how do they respond to that? There are a few typical paths. Some try to come back. They pretend nothing happened. They test the waters. Hey, just checking on you. I miss us. You were always the one who understood me. It's not real remorse. It's a fishing line, a hook. They want to know, do I still have access? Do I still matter? Others will try to erase you completely. Pretend you never existed. Rewrite the story. Suddenly, you were the problem. You were unstable. You were toxic. That's projection. It's classic. They can't tolerate the idea that someone figured them out, so they must destroy your credibility. If they can't own you, they'll try to discredit you. But here's the truth. None of that matters anymore. Because once you stop participating in their story, they lose their power. And more importantly, you gain yours. You begin to see the difference between validation and truth, between attention and love, between intensity and intimacy. You learn that real connection doesn't require self-abandonment, that you don't have to shrink to keep the peace, that you don't have to bleed to prove your loyalty. You also learn to sit with the grief, because there is grief, not just for what happened, but for what could have been. You grieve the version of them you wanted to believe in. You grieve the version of yourself who tried so hard to be enough. And that grief, it's not weakness. It's sacred. It's necessary. It means your heart is healing. It means you're facing the truth, not running from it. And slowly, miraculously, you begin to rebuild. You learn to trust your intuition again. You learn to enjoy your own company. You build relationships that are mutual, respectful, life-giving. You rediscover joy, purpose, direction. You begin to live a life that is no longer shaped by fear or confusion or obligation. A life built on your own values, your own desires, your own inner compass. And here's where it gets beautiful. You start to become someone you admire. Not perfect, not invincible, but whole, authentic, grounded. And that transformation, that quiet, steady reclaiming of your soul is the real victory. The narcissist might never acknowledge it. They might never admit defeat. They might even pretend like you were never important. But deep down, somewhere under the performance, they know they lost something they'll never get back. Not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to walk away. Not because you were cruel, but because you were wise enough to stop bleeding for someone who never brought you healing. And they'll try to replace you, but it won't work. Because they're not looking for love. They're looking for reflection. And no one mirrors them quite like the person they trained and controlled. That was you once, but not anymore. Now, you're free. And that freedom, it doesn't need applause. It doesn't need them to see it. It just is. You carry it in your silence, in your boundaries, in your peace. That's what happens when they realize you've won. Not because you punished them, but because you loved yourself enough to leave, and you kept walking. People imagine healing as a breakthrough. They think it's this shining moment when you suddenly stop hurting and start smiling, when you're done crying and finally feeling strong again. But healing, real healing, is not an event. It's a practice. a habit, a decision you have to make every single day. And often, it's quiet, almost invisible, especially to the people who once broke you. You don't stand up and declare it. You don't post it online with a perfectly lit selfie and a caption about growth. No! Healing usually happens in silence. When no one's watching, when there's no one to impress, when you choose for maybe the 100th time not to go back to the pain you came from. And it starts with something unbelievably hard. You stop hoping that the narcissist will change. Now, that sounds cruel, doesn't it? You don't want to be the kind of person who gives up on people. You want to believe that deep down they'll come around, that they'll wake up, that they'll understand what they did. You tell yourself, if I'm patient enough, if I forgive enough, if I communicate clearly enough, they'll finally treat me like I matter. But they won't. And that's not because you weren't worth loving. It's because they were never ready to love at all. You see, narcissists don't operate from a place of connection. They operate from a place of control. They don't build relationships. They build hierarchies. Someone is always beneath them, always dependent, always needing to earn their attention. And for a long time, that someone was you. You tried to make it work. You explained your feelings. You justified your needs. You tried being louder, then quieter, then more patient, then more tolerant. You blamed yourself for wanting too much. And every time you got close to peace, they pulled the rug out from under you again. Why? Because peace to a narcissist is terrifying. Peace means stability. Stability means predictability. And predictability means they lose control. So they create chaos. Just enough to keep you unsteady, to keep you spinning, to keep you close. And you, being the empathetic person you are, mistook that chaos for passion. You thought they must care. They're emotional. They react. That means they feel. But the truth is, their emotions weren't about connection. They were about domination. They were designed to confuse, not to relate. And once you see that, once the fog starts to clear, you come to the hardest part of all. You have to walk away. Not just physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You have to let go of the fantasy. The fantasy that they'll wake up one day and realize how deeply they hurt you and apologize like they mean it. That fantasy will destroy you. That hope is a cage. So, what does healing look like? It looks like deleting a message and not replying. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're done playing altogether. It looks like sitting on the edge of your bed and letting yourself cry, not because you're weak, but because you finally stopped pretending everything's okay. It looks like calling a friend, or going to therapy, or just staring at the ceiling and realizing you made it through another day without asking for their approval. And they don't expect that. They expect chaos. They expect you to come back. They expect you to fall apart without them. Because for so long, you made them your source of peace, of self-worth, of identity. So when you choose stillness, when you choose to stop explaining and start listening to your own instincts, they panic. Not openly, but deep down, they feel it. Because narcissists don't know what to do with someone who doesn't flinch anymore. They don't know how to manipulate someone who isn't doubting themselves. That stillness, that boundary, that's your sword now. It protects you, but it doesn't happen overnight. Healing isn't linear. You'll have days when you miss them. That's okay. You're not weak for remembering. You're human. What matters is that you don't return to the pattern. And it's hard because you're not just healing from them. You're healing from what they trained you to believe, that your needs were too much, that your feelings were wrong, that you had to earn love through suffering. That's the real battle. Reprogramming your nervous system to feel safe without their chaos. You start noticing the signs, the quiet ones. You feel your shoulders drop in calm conversations. You breathe easier around people who don't raise their voice. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't listen. That's healing. It's not dramatic, but it's powerful. You stop looking for closure. Not because you wouldn't deserve it, but because you finally understand closure isn't something they'll give you. It's something you give yourself. And that's what breaks the cycle. Because the cycle was never about them changing. It was always about you realizing you don't need to keep waiting. You don't need their apology to heal. You don't need them to understand in order to move forward. You're allowed to close the door on your own. And when you do that, when you reclaim your power, not loudly, not vengefully, but silently and steadily, they feel it. They won't admit it, but they do. Because for the first time, you're not chasing them. You're not explaining. You're not breaking down every word they say. You're living. That's unfamiliar to them. It's threatening. Because your peace is louder than any argument. Your boundary is more powerful than any insult. And your healing makes them irrelevant. That's the win. Not revenge. Not gloating. Not proving anything. Just peace. You go to sleep without anxiety. You wake up without checking your phone for their message. You laugh again. You create. You feel. That's what they never expected. That you could move on without them. And yes, they'll try to poke. To prod. Maybe even to apologize. But not because they've changed, because they're uncomfortable with your strength. Because your stillness reminds them of everything they aren't. You see, they didn't love you. They used you to love themselves. And when you stop participating in that equation, they lost their reflection. And that emptiness, it haunts them. But you're building something now. A life. Not a performance. Not a compromise. A life where you trust yourself again. Where you speak up, where you laugh and cry without fear of punishment, where love isn't a war zone, where peace isn't temporary. And that's the story now, not their story. Yours. And it's not just survival, it's resurrection. You came back from something that was designed to keep you trapped. You broke the cycle. You let go of the fantasy. You faced the grief, and now you're free. They'll notice, quietly, slowly, desperately, but you'll keep going, because you no longer need to be seen by someone who is never looking at the real you anyway. And that is the quietest, strongest victory of all. When people talk about winning against a narcissist, they often think about escape, about walking away, about going no contact and shutting the door forever. And yes, those are acts of courage. But I want to propose something deeper, something harder, something more transformative. You don't just walk away from a narcissist. You walk back into yourself. That's the real win. See, when you've been entangled with someone manipulates reality, who rewrites your story, who denies your truth, who punishes your needs, you don't just lose them. You lose parts of you. The parts that used to speak confidently. The parts that used to feel joyful without guilt. The parts that knew the difference between compromise and surrender. So winning isn't just moving on. It's about making meaning out of what happened. It's about reclaiming the self that was twisted to fit into someone else's narrative. And that's hard work. Deep, internal, often invisible work. But it's necessary, because if you don't make meaning, the experience eats away at you. It makes you bitter. distrustful, isolated. So making meaning isn't just healing, it's survival. But let me tell you something, the narcissist will not help you do that. In fact, they'll resist it. They will rewrite the past. Not with facts, but with spin. They will minimize what happened. It wasn't that bad. You're too sensitive. We both made mistakes. They may even paint themselves as the victim, because in their mind, your healing is an insult. Your clarity is betrayal. Your boundaries are rejection. You can't count on them to tell the truth. So your task is to tell it yourself. And that's where meaning begins, not in their words, but in your willingness to face what really happened, to name it, to sit with it, to mourn it, and then to build something new. You begin by saying to yourself, perhaps quietly at first, it wasn't me. Not as an excuse, not to avoid responsibility, but to reject the shame they implanted in you. The shame that made you doubt your voice. That made you apologize for having feelings. That made you believe you had to earn love. You didn't. Love is not a transaction. It is not conditional upon obedience. It is not something you receive only after shrinking yourself to fit someone else's expectations. You have to name that truth over and over again, especially on the days when your mind plays tricks on you. Because that's what trauma does. It distorts memory. It whispers doubts. It asks you to rewrite the past so it hurts less. But real healing doesn't come from denial. It comes from ownership, not of their choices, but of your response. And that's the hardest part. Because sometimes the only closure you get is your own honesty. So you begin to write, or speak, or sit in therapy. And little by little, you construct a new story. One that doesn't deny the pain, but also doesn't let the pain define you. You say, yes, I was manipulated. Yes, I stayed longer than I should have. Yes, I lost myself in trying to be loved. But then you say, and I'm still here. That sentence, those 4 words are the foundation of your recovery. You're still here. You survive. And more than that, you are learning. You are evolving. You are using your story not as a prison, but as a compass to guide others, to protect yourself, to redefine what love and truth mean. You start to rebuild your identity not as a reaction to them, but as a return to who you were before them, and maybe even someone better than that. Wiser, more grounded, less tolerant of disrespect, more committed to peace. But here's the thing, that rebuilding will be misunderstood, not by you, but by them. The narcissist will not applaud your growth. They may mock it, dismiss it, or pretend they inspired it. But that's irrelevant, because your growth isn't about them. It's about you, about becoming someone you're finally proud to be. Not perfect, but proud. You begin to show up differently in your friendships, in your work, in your self-talk. You stop over-explaining. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You stop tolerating one-sided conversations. And slowly, the world around you starts to shift. Not because it changed, but because you did. You carry yourself differently. Not with arrogance, but with clarity. And clarity is contagious. It sets a new standard. It says to others, this is how I expect to be treated. Not by yelling, not by demanding, but simply by being whole. And that wholeness, it's threatening to the narcissist, because they remember a different version of you, the one they could manipulate, the one who walked on eggshells, the one who twisted themselves into knots to earn approval. They see now that version is gone, and what replaced it is something they can't control. You. You in your full truth. You with your head high. You with your voice steady.